Hey everybody, I'm here with another video. Um, Originally, so this is another game by the mysterious master player. And this is its game with Ke Jie, the first game that they played together. Master won, still undefeated, Master won by 5.5 as black. And this is also the first, one of the, I think the majority of my other games, Master was white, so this will be an interesting different kind of thing to look at. And Ke Jie obviously is considered to be the best player in the world at the moment. If he says he has been not doing quite as well as he did earlier in the year or last year, but yeah, I don't know. He's still really really strong, so it'll be interesting to look at. I think. Originally, I was gonna go through all the games in order, but I figured, you know, I didn't know if it was going to play more games, but actually it's playing more games. So I didn't want to. I thought, I thought that maybe it might be better or more interesting to people to see the games it plays with some of the more recognizable pros. I don't know why my file name is all messed up. Ke Jie plays on Taigame as Kiss88. But yeah, let's get to it. I think we're going to be pretty interesting. Master starts with 4-4. Most of the games I've noticed, it starts with 4-4 point is black, although I think I saw one where it was a 3-4 point. And then plays this very interesting 2-space high enclosure. I think, with regards to Ke Jie's play, I think most of the games I've seen as white that where someone's playing white against Master, they tend to take a 3-4 point here. So I'm not sure if this high, like this extremely high speedy move is oriented in some way around dealing with the 4-4, but it's interesting to think about. And from a really theoretical standpoint, yes, being higher and further out does diminish the influence of the white stones. But whether or not, that's the specific consideration, or if it's a program, I think most people agree it's a program now. Sorry. This was just like an iteration type of thing. Like, this is what it chose this time. Thought it was best given its playouts. It's still interesting to think about and look at. I have never seen an opening where black plays like this, and for me, it's hard to have the courage to play this kind of very high, loose move, where there's a lot of potential still left there, where it's not very solid. Ke Jie takes a very solid enclosure here. This is natural. If we play, of course we could split or something too, but then an approach here is working nicely with our high stone. So that's part of the consideration. Also, this type of enclosing move often says, okay, you're going to play for a moyo, right? Which I think we see. Oh, that's interesting. If black played for a moyo, in a normal fashion, even if white plays somewhere else and black comes here, or sorry, maybe here, because we have this very strong bottom left area, we can aim at just deeply invading. And even if this is a very simplified invasion, like super super simple, but just to show the flow of how the flow of the game would go. Since even though black gets very very strong here, because this corner is already enclosed, it's quite strong and resilient. It's harder for black to use this strength. So typically you see this kind of enclosing move, especially against like the Chinese opening or certain Orthodox opening variations, as a means of basically saying I'm going for profit, and I'm going to be reducing the potential moyo in the future, and it helps with that. Very interesting move. We've seen this kind of shoulder hit a few times in some of Master's other games. It's interesting to think about why it would play it here. It's probably very similar to the case against the 3-4 enclosure. This is a 4-4 stone enclosure, but the idea is probably very similar. You want to get a sense of which direction white is going to prefer. Usually white will push up or extend. Extending tends to be more for profit, where pushing up is going to be looking at a continuation like this usually, or black could jump Both are fine. Jumping is more developmental, flexible, and extending is stronger, aiming at more potential in the corner. And then normally white's follow-up is a slide. So going this way is making a more thick shape, whereas pushing here, which Ke Jie plays, and if black extends or jumps, the idea is that we're emphasizing more the bottom area. It's kind of you're emphasizing the direction that you didn't push in, because once you push in that direction, your black's going to answer in that direction usually. So since white pushes here, now black has a sense of white saying, okay, white's still focusing more on developing their own space than reducing black space, even though it looks like, pushing this way. And so so with that in mind, black comes back and forms the moyo here. Right? So now the idea is that since white pushed this way, white actually has a harder time dealing with the left side if black ever comes here, because now the left is just has a nice balance. The best you could probably do is this, unless you're going to play like an invasion move, but then this would get quite complicated. But a natural move would be the slide, but this is relatively small value because white's already alive, and black could just continue to press white down, or maybe cut in some cases. If we compare to this push and this slide, now if black plays here, it's actually a little bit easier for white to come back up. And by harassing these two stones, white is diminishing, is naturally setting up a shape that'll let it go further into black space. That's kind of the directional reasoning for what I was saying earlier. So now that we know that white wants to develop their own space more, and this is a little bit greedy for territory, but it's not that big a difference. Black came back to the top, not answering locally, because if black answers locally, white will come to the top, and basically this, you can think of this like a loose chain of stones, like a wall. It might be difficult to use once white can establish a group here. White approaches. Very natural. We don't want black to develop a really large framework centered around this stone in the upper right. For example, if we play at the bottom and we just play a very simple continuation, this moyo gets very big. We notice white is basically only on the bottom side of the board. Maybe white plays something like this, but this gets very large, or an enclosure like this. So white approaches on the right side. It's the most urgent or largest place to play. And black backs off. Very natural. A lot of players might be tempted to pincer. This is possible, but if we just follow a very normal continuation, black's basically invested everything into this top side. If white adds a move here, just saying, similar to the enclosure idea, just expanding our own space, getting stronger, and aiming at a later possible invasion, maybe around these points. Black has a hard time, because if you play down here, for instance, and you make a group that has to be settled, and then white comes in, maybe here, if white lives, it's very hard to get enough profit, especially because we chose this loose enclosure. So it's not a super strong shape. This kind of loose enclosure from the beginning has been saying black's more interested in developing a large-scale center strategy, and so we don't want to give away too much profit directly by pincering. I think this move also just is more simple. It strengthens the relationship here, although it's a little bit strange because it's three space on the same line. But again, if we play the knight's move, then that's going to be low and not make as good a balance with our d14 stone. Okay, so white takes the corner. This is very popular these days, especially in China. I have not seen this in a long time, but I saw a few of these from Guli, and I can't pronounce his name properly, but like Zhao Liang. He's a really strong Chinese professional, top 5, I think. I think he's known because he was like self-taught, like he didn't have professional instruction and became a pro. He's really impressive, actually. But black Tenuki, so I only seen this in a few games, but it's interesting. I think it's in many ways, once you see it, it becomes clear. So black is saying that the corner on the upper right and this block at c8 are roughly the same value. So it's a very simple Miai strategy. And also that this bottom side and this right side are also roughly the same value because they're just both developing from here. There's a little bit of consideration for this corner and this corner, but if we think that white's probably taking the upper right and black's taking the left, then both sides are relatively strong groups and they're generally similar distance. In the game, white plays here, but if we think about what would have happened if white wedged, then maybe black comes back and blocks here. Maybe not though. It's interesting to think about. Maybe black just expands. Might still be not big enough because it still doesn't really deal with the center. It's hard to say. I'm not entirely sure. Ke Jie played here. I can understand this move because it's really big to take this corner, and it aims at this weakness here to attack the 3 stones on a large scale. And if black defends it, we can still slide under and reduce the top. And these 2 stones, even though black gets this move, there's still quite a few weak points left in this space. So I understand why Ke Jie chose this move. It's just interesting to consider from black's perspective that black decided this was the right time to come back and play this move, which is also really large when you think about it. White getting this point is also really huge for reducing the moyo, as we saw earlier. Okay, so black plays here and white reduces. This is might look really strange to a lot of players. If I was reviewing a Q game, well, I'm very familiar, not familiar, but I see this move a lot when I review go over older games from Go Seiken and stuff sometimes. This move at first glance looks really strange to most people because the right side is very open and so it's easy to come into. But remember, black's going for this very large center strategy. Black is still thin here, so we're preparing for a future invasion, basically. And white has this bottom right corner, so even though it's very open, white is still developing the right, and we can still think of this as a border of 2 moyos type of move. And it has a nice looking type of follow-up here or here, one of these 2, to try to attack these 3 stones on a large scale. So it's a very natural move, although I think a lot of players might be hesitant to play this kind of bold center move. Black approaches, white backs off. Notice that we're playing low. Even though we played this high move, the main purpose of this move is not development, otherwise we would have played something over here. It's to attack. If we're thinking of it from that perspective, we don't want a high move here. If we played a high move, we attack, black runs out in the center somehow, then there's going to be more potential for black to come back and counterattack the right side later. Since we're preparing for this kind of invasion strategy, we want to make as solid a shape as possible, and the knight's answer basically handles that. We wouldn't want to pincer or anything either because that would give black the opportunity to change directions and reduce the right, or even just very, very simple, right? Something on the right. And the bottom side is not as big as the right anyway. That's why we don't want to allow black to change directions. That's because these stones are already here, which are on the same line as the star point, so it's actually not too easy for white to develop the bottom, at least in a quick moyo type of fashion. And if we're wondering why didn't black approach from this side then, now white would not there. Now white would probably pincer. And if we take the 3-3 point, we'll lose Sente as black, and white's moyo is actually getting quite large. And if we jump, it's actually maybe a little bit difficult to attack this stone, and if it was possible to attack it, we would just play a higher pincer. Something a little less severe but harder to counterattack. You can imagine something like this. But again, O13's primary idea was not just to create development. The development on the right is still bigger than the bottom, but it's still to come in and attack the top and reduce the moyo from black anyway. So anyway,
game request.
Oh, sorry, I have Taigame open. I have ignore invites on too, so I don't know why that popped up. But so white backs off, and black plays this very unusual move. How do we understand this move? Obviously, it's attacking this corner because it's still open. and it's trying to strike a right balance here. Well, if we think about it, if we played a close approach, let's say white doesn't even try to counterattack, white just answers. Then if we come back and make this shape, there's an invasion point here, an invasion point on the right, so it's actually not a very nice shape. We might play something like this, but this traditionally has lots of bad aji because of all the cutting points that are in it. Okay, what about we just make a solid shape? Well, but then white can make this nice extension from this corner, and even though it's open, it's not easy to harass or invade because this group is still weak. If black jumps up or something, we can still just take the corner, or jump up ourselves and make this invasion even harder in the future. So that doesn't seem very promising for black. It's possible we could go back to expanding our moyo, but then this exchange in the bottom right would be bad. So yeah, this move strikes a nicer balance. If we think of white just answering, maybe black forces once here, and then we come back and defend. This shape compared to the other one, it does have a weakness here and here, but this one at M3 is a much more manageable weakness. And this shape for black compared to the other shape is a lot stronger with regards to the right side, so it'll be easier for black to reduce or invade the right later. Compared to if we have this shape. If we wanted to come into the right later, just something very simple, there's a lot of possibilities for counterattacks here, like this, and leaning moves, that if we have this running fight, we could just directly lean, and maybe we'll end up losing some points. So that's probably just why black chose this move instead of the more common F3 move. Of course, Ke Jie doesn't want to give black a nice, easy time settling on the bottom. This was originally white's area, so he splits. And then black just settles, right? You didn't take the corner, so I'm going to settle. This stone at O3 might look a little isolated. We're starting to see that white has this kind of large encroaching strength on it, but this bottom left corner is much heavier. It takes precedence, right? If we imagine giving this up, this is so much bigger than this, and this right is still invadable. So white has to answer and black jumps out. This jump is really important. A lot of players, who I've taught, maybe strong Q players, and definitely not, I think down players would be strong enough, but you might be tempted to play something like J3. This is very solid. But if we think about it, it makes it so that it's very easy for white to force black to connect or save the O3 stone in some way. But this is really low and inefficient, and now this is getting quite big. I think white would actually play something like this. But by jumping here, it actually makes it still quite hard to attack O3. The reason is if you kick, on the one sense this move is taught a lot because it makes black heavy. It's also very common in handicap games. But the problem is you make black heavy, but you also make black a little bit stronger. And you notice that you're pushing black up, so now L4 is on the same height as the O4 stone, which means that L4 got a little bit weaker. So if we defend, which is something relatively normal, now the L4 stone is getting isolated and it's going to be under pressure. And if we jump, then we can jump too, and naturally we're breaking into the right-hand side. This group is not killable. It is a weak group, but the problem is when black is settling this group, white's going to lose all the potential on the right. So it's not a very good strategy for white. And you notice that because of G5, there's no counter attack over here either. It's different than,
You have a game request.
Okay, I'm just going to close tag him. I seriously have invites off. I don't know why it does that. But if I add a move somewhere, even the same thing, if white tries to attack it, like this, I don't know, same kind of thing. It's problematic, but these stones are nowhere near as weak as before because black isn't blocking this line of sight at the bottom left. Like white can always come back and make some shape while threatening to connect. Even just the threat is good because it makes shape for yourself. So in the game, white peeps. I think this is kind of a probe. If black plays here, white gets the Hana later, which is good for endgame and helps strengthen the corner. So if black played here, maybe white would now just deal with this shape because the corner requires another move to attack to get rid of that Hana possibility. Black plays very solid by connecting, which means that now there's a little bit more cutting Aji on the outside here. And then Ke Jie plays this Q3 move. This is also a really good attacking move. Compared to the kick, we don't help Black get out, but Black still needs to help save the O3 stone, and we didn't. And we removed the possibility of this stone making a base in the corner. Black pushes because, again, easier to give up one stone than it is to give up this group. But White can make pretty easy life at just making these forcing exchanges. And then we jump. After we play Q3, it's too small scale to play this way. Because we already added an extra move, so I'm not sure what the best way would be, but Black would be aiming somehow to reduce the right-hand side while developing their Moyo, maybe just here. Although this might be a bit passive, you might think something really simple, just shoulder hit, but then there's some counterattacks at the top. Not sure what's the best move, but something like this is pretty natural. Expand your own space, reduce the right. Alternatively, maybe the difficulty here is finding the right point that still protects this kind of counterattack is the most difficult thing. If there's not a good way, then maybe we just come in, and say, okay, this counterattack possibility exists, but if we're not adding another move here, then that move won't lose efficiency from this counterattack. We'll just deal with the counterattack directly and say White can't make enough points. That's also possible. So Ke Jie has to play this way to keep expanding his own space while reducing Black's space and trying to swallow O3 on a large scale. That's pretty natural. These are just kind of forced endgame moves because this group has to live, right? And then Black comes over here. This is really nice. Many players, so maybe some strong Q players, they'll play here, just trying to save their stone, but this counterattack happens, or even just very simple flow, right? Like super simple. Like just expanding the space. Yeah, I think this is still fun because if Black comes in, you can come in here. And if you defend, then maybe come back. If you just keep expanding the space, Black ends up actually very flat. It is fourth line territory, but it's very flat. This is like fifth or sixth, seventh, eighth. It's like really, really big. Eighth line territory at some points and sixth on the other points. So you really should come into the right. The normal ideas would be to play something around here, aiming to reduce the right or back off and deal with the left. So White comes here, then we come further in. If White defends, then we can push a little bit and then back off and expand our own space. But this move is really nice. It's obviously forcing, because if we follow up, we're almost alive. We can't, even with the pincer now, we can Hana a couple times, make a move here, attach under, take away the attachment, make two eyes. Pretty easy. So this is obviously forcing. The question is, it's throwing a question again to White. Do you want to block on this side? Do you want to block on this side? If you block on this side, it'll be easier for me to maybe jump this way or come back here. If you jump on this side, then the right side will be easier to play on, potentially. Or but you've already invested in the bottom, so now a move on the bottom is more threatening too. It's quite hard to answer. Ke Jie chose this direction, and then Black came back here. This might look a little weird, especially if you're not used to making sabaki like this. It's actually not a very intuitive shape, but it makes a lot of sense. You're aiming at this jump, which makes a horse's head, which is quite nice for making eye shape. You're loosely linking up to O3, and you're threatening these cutting and forcing moves. So it has a lot of potential eye shape. Also, if we imagine this exchange with Black happening, I put the stones in the wrong order, but it's fine. It can start to develop a little bit of eye shape at 07, especially in combination with like a jump here. So we're pressuring the center, making shape for ourselves, and kind of still keeping our options open, which is the most important thing when you're doing this. You want to keep your options open because once you move, your opponent knows exactly what you're going for and can stop it with their move. But if you play a more quiet move, something that's a bit more flexible, then we see what our opponent does, and then we can move to capitalize on the weakness of that move. Ke Jie attached because he's trying to defend the cutting weaknesses here. But this is nice because it helps black to make shape. And black chooses a very simple variation, just splitting white and making shape. The latter doesn't work, so white has to extend. Then black pushes. Our group is a little dicey, but I think we're okay because after, if we look at these exchanges, there's multiple cutting points that white can't really handle. Cutting points with shortage of liberties. Oh, that was what was played. And black came here. So again, this is just attacking the group on a whole large scale. We always have P2 in reserve, and L3 and L5 are Miai. So if we play this, just cut. Play here, sorry, Miai. So if we play here, we can cut here, and we'll either take the 3 or take the 2. So we're safe. This move is pretty natural. Basically, at this point, Ke Jie's decided to give these 4 stones up, which is reasonable because there's not much he can do. So he's using them to make this move, to reduce the center potential. If you weren't familiar with the shape, you might be greedy. You might just say, "Oh, I'm worried about this bottom group. I better defend," right? But the problem is actually there's a squeeze here that if you're not familiar with can go like this. Obviously, the ladder doesn't work, but white can squeeze again like this. I guess you have to play like this, but this is really painful because now white's getting a lot of strength to come in, or in the center, and now white can come in very easily. In fact, this whole chain at the top is looking a little bit dicey. So that's why black has to defend here. And now white, finally, having built some strength in the center, comes to attack the 3 stones. And this is really interesting. It's actually quite hard. A lot of players will play something like this or like this to save them, but if white just naturally even you somehow manage to live, white's already completely destroyed your moyo. And yeah, the right moyo was big, but this left is even bigger, so it's a success for white. White's also going to be able to gain some points inside the moyo, not making a small life. So black has to be more creative. This attachment is kind of a probe. If you hane, you introduce the crosscut. You also introduce this attachment, which means that then this bulge is a problem because multiple Ataris. Whoops. Right? So white answers in the most severe way to remove, basically connecting the stones up and improving the liberties on R14. In order to avoid the shortage of liberties that comes from those kind of hanes and Ataris, you have to play an extension. But this one, although it looks weird for black, black does get the potential to make an eye here later. So this one's more severe. And then black plays this move. This is a very nice shape point. Basically, black's saying it's okay to take these, but you're going to be taking them in a very small way. If white cuts, which white does, black can press here. But without thinking about that move too much for a second, whenever we make a kosumi shape, the kosumi is very bad for liberties, the diagonal shape, because you can fill one and the other one gets filled. Or generally, you have to connect the other one, which means that you're forced to fill in your own liberties. So if you have a shape like this, let's say you're pushed through, right, and you're like, okay, I'm going to kill this. Now, you might have some problems because once you play stuff like this, you have to answer this one here. And if you go this way, you might have to answer this one here. Of course, it's the Atari, but the potential for this kind of shortage of liberties is really dangerous. That's why we typically find this cap, which a lot of people call it, it's also an elephant's jump, which a lot of weak players say, isn't that a bad shape because you can get cut. The idea is, anytime you cut something, you have to shorten your liberties in order to cut because you're running between groups. So by playing in this particular elephant's jump, inviting the kosumi shape, we're trying to take advantage of that shortage of liberties to get a better sacrifice on this group, since we can't save it directly without damaging our position. Black plays here. This is a very nice move. If white defends, black could be aiming at pushing. Right? If we look at a similar variation to what I just showed, this one would mean that now P12 can't be captured because we can come back and the M12 stone helps. We also could be aiming at this kind of cut or this kind of attachment. It basically opens up a lot of potential places to play. White comes back here to see, basically just probe how black's going to answer. Of course, black can play this way directly, but the problem with this, if we play it directly, is that it opens up some nice endgame for white, and maybe white has some shenanigans to make life here. So we want to just answer that, and then we come back. I think is partly probe, partly time Suji. Remember that these games are played in fairly fast time settings. So now black follows up on this. Well, white defends the cut, right? If white plays something somewhere, there's a cut here. So white defends the cut, and then black takes advantage of the liberty problem by pushing through. And now we see, oh, 2 Kosumis through 2 elephants jumps. Anytime we play this move, we can cut one side or the other because white is overloaded in how many moves to play. Of course, pushing directly is really crude because now our K16 stone is hurt, but we can still use the same logic. So that is always in black's reserve. We're going to save our stones first, though. This is just a forcing exchange to break into the right, and then we come back here. And it's the same kind of idea. Because there's this cutting potential, black's able to shorten the liberties of this group in a large sense in order to connect. If we imagine this exchange has been made, these 2 stones, then this stone, you couldn't really play it because white would get cut. But if white does that now, we can cut the other way, which is what happens in the game. And white can't connect because we just take the stone, or I think we can actually just pull back because of the liberties are good enough. Could be wrong though. I'd have to read it. It's 3 to 4, so not quite enough. But we could just take the stone, and that would be good enough to live. And we see, so we're holding these liberty problems in reserve. White Ataris and connects. I guess it's better shape, I'm not sure. Forces black to push, and black attacks this group, makes life, and white comes in. White, under normal circumstances, should defend here to save the group. But the problem is maybe if black just answers here, this long chain is really big. And we actually lost some points on the right, so we'd have to defend this, but then, we just play some simple endgame stuff. This is so big, this group, because we have this, it's not completely alive, these endgames are sente, the game's basically over. White doesn't have enough to compete, so white has to come in, but then black says your group's not in trouble, is in danger, and basically at this point the group is dead. If white comes here, the group could potentially live? No, it can't. It can't, right? Yeah, no, it can't, because black just comes here. Even if you attach, there's no I to be found. Maybe just Han is better, right? There's a little bit of Aji, but I don't think anything really works. At least not directly, because this is pretty strong. So white comes back and attacks these stones. So this top group's basically dead now, in compensation for getting 2 moves in the center, which are really big because it revitalizes the bottom group. Now this group is in danger, and this group's obviously getting surrounded. We just live with the bottom, makes sense. If we save these stones and lose the bottom, it's much bigger because this group can push into to me it sounds obvious. This group can just push into white's area. Obviously it's bigger. These stones don't have any bearing, because if we assume one of these is going to die, then this group for white is alive. So there's no value in saving these as cutting stones because it's going to be alive. And then so we just save the bigger one. Obviously this one is connected to the right and is alive. So white attacks this, and a lot of players would be like, well, gotta fight. But black's ahead enough, so black just takes points. At this point, the game's basically over. I don't think there's really much that white can do. They play some endgame and some probes. Very, generally good technique stuff. But if we just zoom through it, I don't think anything of major consequence happens. There's just basically really good endgame technique, which is not really what I wanted to focus on in this video. I think the most interesting thing is this opening. The early shoulder hit here as a probe to see which direction white wants to play in. And then this tenuki is nice, recognizing that the development potentials are relatively the same, and we can make miai of the upper right and the bottom left. And then Ke Jie, I think this is a very normal looking move. It's like a very nice move. It does look a little weird, but I think it's quite normal for these kind of moyo situations. But I don't know. Maybe it wasn't good. I couldn't say. I don't really know where white made a mistake. If I did know, it probably wouldn't be my strength. I think G3 is very nice. It's not a move I would normally think of, but it strikes a much better balance. And then this is just general good fighting. I think after you have a slight opening loss, the fighting gets difficult to manage. Like, you're always going to have to start a fight, but once you have an opening loss, you have to find ways to maneuver it. So I think Black just did a really good job of handling the opening, and then once Black gets into trouble with their groups, their position is still okay. So it's important just to keep calm and, make good judgments about what is important to save, what's not important to save. How do we use our weaknesses to our advantage, right? Like, this group's weak in the upper right. Maybe we use it to sacrifice and improve the rest of our position. And white doesn't want that, so white fights here, but ends up still behind. So white has to fight even harder, but can't really turn it around. Okay. Well, that wraps it up for this video. I hope you learned something. I hope it was enjoyable. And if you made it this far, thanks for watching. And I'll see you all next time. Thank you.